Okay, let's talk about Pocketbase 0.23 and OTP authentication. Prior to this version, the only authentication that is supported within Pocketbase is username, password, and then OAuth. And a lot of times for your side projects, whatever, it's nice to have passwordless type of sign-on. Anyway, if you clicked on this, you probably want to know something about OTP authentication. So let's just implement that in a demo app. Let's go to the code here. So far, all I have is just a basic form here, and this is all inside of a NextJS app, but I'm not going to be using any NextJS specific features. This is purely just client-side React code that we're looking at. Before we start writing any client-side code to support OTP authentication in this little dummy app here, we need to set up some stuff inside of our Pocketbase instance. And again, you do need to download the version 0.23 of Pocketbase for this to work. And for the client-side JavaScript library that I'm using, it's version 0.22, I believe, that supports the functionality for OTP code authentication in 0.23 of Pocketbase, just to make it a little extra confusing for you. Okay, I'm working with a completely clean Pocketbase instance here. To enable OTP authentication, you need to go into your users collection or whatever you're using as your authenticated collection here. And under options, you can enable not OAuth, one-time password. And importantly, we also want to disable the identity password. I'll explain why that's important in a minute when we start integrating this stuff together. And then here we can also update information about how long this OTP is good for. I'm just going to say 2 minutes is plenty, and then let's up this to like 12. Cool. Let's start with just some outline steps of how this is going to work. One, we've already done. We accept some email input. Great. Then we need to create a Pocketbase user if they don't exist with the email that is provided. There's a bit of a caveat to this one that we're going to have to get around for OTP codes, but I'll mention that later. Step 3, request the OTP code from Pocketbase. Tell Pocketbase, send the user this email with an OTP code, and then in return, this thing returns to us an OTP ID that we have to pass in to verify the final OTP code. Step 4, Pocketbase triggers the email, send of that OTP code, user provides OTP code to our web form, we send the OTP code back to Pocketbase, user authenticated. An easy 7-step program here. Okay, let's go ahead and get this going. We have accepted an email, but the first step we need to do in our Pocketbase instance is to create the user. Create, I will explain what is happening here once I can type correctly.
Email, password, confirm.
Okay, if we're only supporting OTP authentication for this application, why do we need passwords? That is enforced by Pocketbase and Pocketbase's auth collections. There are some fields that they just require. There's no really good way to get around this. So when we create a user, we have to provide a password and a password confirm. In this case, I'm just going to pass a fixed string into all of these users. Should be fine to do this just because we have completely disabled identity password authentication. So even if somebody did know that, oh, you're hard coding this password value, they can't authenticate with the password. But just for safety, in case somebody accidentally toggles this identity password button back on, go ahead and auto-generate random values for these so you don't have to deal with it. Okay, let's await that. Like I mentioned before, up here for the create Pocketbase user if they exist, I mentioned there was a caveat here. And that caveat is that what do we do if the user is logging in instead of registering for the first time? And in that case, this call to create is going to fail. Some ways around that are, okay, I rambled here like a moron for about a minute. The point I'm trying to get at is if you want to ensure a user doesn't exist before creating it, you have to look that user up somehow. And we are writing this on our client at the moment. So the only real way to do that is to expose a view collection or your actual users table, which is a terrible idea. Other alternatives are creating a backend endpoint that is completely separate here to do this user creation that can look up the users table in a more secured way. Or you could even go so far as to write a hook into Pocketbase that does this check before the create user actually happens. Okay, and back to, in our case, I'm fine to just ignore this error. What we're going to do is call this create call, and if it fails with a specific error, I happen to know what that is. I'm going to type this out.
Quick is error instance of client error. That is exported from Pocketbase right here. And let's just say error dot status is equal to.
It returns a 400, and we'll look at the error message here in a second, just to see exactly what we're checking for. We'll just user already exists, ignore error, and then if it's not that error, let's just say, let's report it somehow. Okay, so let's test this out in our app. Load this. I'm going to submit. Let's see what happens in our network here. Okay, great. So this is what was sent to our Pocketbase instance, and it created that user. So if we go over here to Pocketbase and refresh our users page, we should see woof@gmail.com, and we do. Now let's see what happens when I say woof@gmail.com again. Okay, we don't get a success, we get an error, and the error is, great, 400 status, and then let's check for this code validation not unique. This is the thing we want to look for here when we're a user. So, and error.
Dot response dot data dot. Let's just double check these. Dot email. Cool.
And then in here, I'll just say console.log. User exists. Geez. Okay. So now let's make sure that this is working as we expect it to. User exists. Cool. This is still logged. This seems to be logged directly from the Pocketbase JavaScript SDK, but I'm sure there's a way to turn that off. Okay, so now that our user definitely exists, it's time to do step number 3, request code from Pocketbase. And we can do that by just saying Pocketbase and then go to our collection that has the OTP code authentication supported, say request OTP. And we need to provide the email that this should send it to. This is the call that also returns to us, let's see, OTP response. This thing will also have, if I go to the type here, it returns an OTP ID. And we'll need to provide this to the final auth call to Pocketbase. So let's actually set this inside of our component too.
Cool. Set OTP ID, OTP response. Dot OTP.
All right, so this is going to trigger Pocketbase to send an email to this end user's email that has an OTP code in it that they can use to authenticate. So next step here is, actually, let's do some form updates here. If I have this OTP ID, I know that we are now no longer interested in getting the email from the user. We're interested in getting that OTP code. So let's update our form logic here.
PID, see this, and then otherwise we will use this form here. Create loop form, and then I'm going to steal this. And instead of email, this is going to be OTP, enter OTP code. And then let's just remove these for the time being. Actually, I can update this. Set form OTP. Form OTP. Set form OTP. Set form OTP. We got target, and then get that value.
Cool. Okay, let's just verify this real quick. So woof@gmail.com. Submit. All right, user exists, so it went through, and then now it's looking for an OTP code, but we have no submit for this. Totally fine. All right, now it's time to set up Pocketbase for email. To do this, we can go in here to our mail settings and set up an SMTP mail server. In real life or in a real project, you would want to set up something like a Mailgun to do this for you. I'm running a local email server called Mailcatcher. That way I can just test this and verify. And I don't have to do the whole Mailgun setup. So this is running on my local host and then 1020. Support@email.com. That's fine. Let's save those changes. Let's test this. Send an OTP email. All right. Looks like Mailcatcher got an email. What's this? Cool. So this is what our one-time password emails are going to look like. Obviously, this is just a test one. Okay. Now that our email server is set up, if I go through this and say woof@gmail.com, I should get an OTP code sent to Mailcatcher, and I do. Let's look at this updated one. That's more like it. We get this code, paste it here. Great, it does nothing. I haven't set up any event handlers for that form yet. But we have our OTP code now. Now what we have to do is get that OTP code back to Pocketbase so that we can authenticate this user. So let's set up an onSubmit for this form.
Submit, and then it's going to be on, OTP, submit, or handle, just whatever. On OTP, submit. Great. Okay.
And when this thing is submitted, I now have my OTP code available. So we can say
OTP is equal to form, OTP, and then let's go ahead and set, let's just clear that form out, just so we know we've submitted.
And then now it's time to actually provide base.collection users.auth with OTP. And this is looking for an OTP ID and a password. The password value is going to be the actual OTP code that was emailed to the user. And this OTP ID is what we saved earlier when we requested the code in the first place. Cool. And this should return to us, say auth response. Wait. And then this will give us, let's see, auth response dot. Yeah, so this will have our actual record with the user's information. Let's just go ahead and, actually I'll just log the whole auth response. Cool, let's go over here, try this again. Code, see if we got a new one. We did, here's our new code. Submit, and you see we get a log of the response there, and it's got a token and it's got a record, and it's our expected user, woof@gmail.com. Great, so now we have our authenticated user, and actually the way that this Pocketbase this JavaScript SDK works is if this auth call is successful, the actual Pocketbase instance that we use here is authenticated for this user. So if there's a collection like products that this user has access to, but a logged out user does not, you now have access to this. So that's cool. We can use Pocketbase now as an authenticated user. The problem is, if I refresh this page, I am not a logged in user. So we need to handle that now. Actually, I'm going to start by saving this user info, set user. Great, and then let's just say set user auth response.record. And I'm going to do something similar to what I did earlier, which is if I do have a user, I don't want to display any forms. Let's just display the user's info.
Directly to the screen. Signify, then give that user. Cool. Add that here, and then I'm going to copy all of this over here. Great. Set state is not defined.
Okay. So now if I go back here and I log into this user and we have the user, it'll just show me the user data that was being logged out here. But let's move forward and try to actually save this information for next time. So the way I'm going to do it, you can do this with cookies as well, and I'm sure a million other ways. But let's just save this auth response token inside of the window.local storage item. And I'm just going to say key is token, and it's the auth response.token. So we're going to save this here, so in between browser refreshes, this page still saves this token within the browser. And then when this page reloads, let's try to read that value. From get item. We're going to try to read this from the local storage. If something exists here, that means we previously saved a token and we can try to log ourselves back in. And the way Pocketbase lets us do this is Pocketbase it's the auth store, and then you can save the token. And this works for authenticating follow-up requests to Pocketbase itself. So if I save that token, and then actually I can also check here, Pocketbase.authStore is valid, and that'll let us know if that token save actually worked. Let's just say if it's not, I'll throw an alert or something. Error, invalid session token. And then we'll just return. Otherwise, we have a valid token and this Pocketbase instance is authenticated. So we could go along and use this Pocketbase instance like we have an authenticated user. I want the actual user data here, and this is pretty common if you're creating some kind of use auth hook, which is where all of this stuff should live. And you want to persist that user data so that, you know, inside of your app you can see user information. And the way we can do this is load with an auth refresh on our collection here. And this will actually return our user again. Refresh response. Wait, oh, we can't await in here. Okay, now we do this, and then I want to set our user to refresh response dot record. All right, let's go test this out. So I'm going to say I'm coming back as wolf.gmail.com. Check my mailer here, get that up-to-date OTP code, submit, and there we see my user's information. And if I refresh the page, I'll see it come back. Cool. So that's how you can log in, register, and keep user authenticated using one-time password auth in Pocketbase version 0.23. All right, thank you for watching. I'm going to stop talking now.